Welcome to BWI Live. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. Our expert insiders with us, as always on Wednesday, Sean Fitz and Nate Bauer. But it's a busy week, lots of stuff going on. Blue-white game coming up this weekend, so this is going to be your de facto preview show. We'll have some more preview material coming up at Blue White Illustrated on YouTube as well. But this is where we're going to sit down and talk about it. And Sean Fitz has to get going because even more stuff going on today. So we're going to get to his thoughts here right out of the gate. Fitz, blue-white game coming up. I know that the answer is usually not a whole lot with the blue-white game in terms of like what are you going to learn, but what are you interested in this weekend? What's piquing your interest as we get towards the actual scrimmage where everyone's in the stadium and guys are tackling on the football field?
Well, number one, the weather looks great. Pretty psyched about that, which means, I mean, to be honest with you, a good recruiting turnout, which is good for me and Ryan. Check us out on Friday. But yeah, I mean, all eyes are on the quarterbacks this week. I don't think there's anything like, I think there's a bunch of overreactions coming. I'm sure of that. Penn State's defense is pretty good. It has been a great test for these young arms and with decision-making, with placing throws and things like that. And it will end up benefiting those guys, but defense well ahead of the offense right now. So I expect to see a strong defensive performance. It's kind of twofold there. You've got the quarterbacks, you've got Drew and Bo, and I think that there's a little step there between Smolik, although we have heard some good things about the way he's been throwing the ball in the second half of camp. There's Greg Pickle in the background of that shot, by the way.
Hey,
we've got the receivers on the other end. That's my big question. James Franklin last night he did not pull punches. When asked about the receivers, he once again pointed to Keandre Lambert-Smith and to Trey Wallace as the two guys that they can rely on. And then who else was there? No names, just everybody else is involved in that race for the second spot. So it's clearly a 1-2 situation. Then what seems to be a fairly large jump, and then you get to the next guy. I'd be curious to see if Amari Evans is that next guy, because that's the kind of the guy that we've heard a little bit of sustained buzz on through spring. So that's my big question is like, how much do you take away from this? I think you're going to look at this and say, when does Dante Cephas get here? That's obviously a big step in the next month and a half. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with the offense. Watched them at practice yesterday. I thought the quarterbacks looked good throwing the ball. I thought that Drew, this and full disclosure here, I've been on the defensive field the entire spring. Nate and I kind of switched yesterday. So it was my first time watching them throw like consistently. Nice breeze blowing. Drew was cutting the ball there well through it. So I was pretty impressed with them just throwing on air. I mean, it's the portion of practice that we get to see. Excited to see how he does in the scrimmage. Excited to see him go against that secondary because that secondary is very good. Very good. So those are kind of my thoughts on that. I don't know that we take a ton from the run game. You want to protect Singleton. You want to protect Katron Allen. You want to protect Olu Fashanu. You want to protect some of those guys that, are probably not 100%. And you're going to get to see Drew Shelton. You're going to see a bunch of walk-ons at running back. So that's kind of where I'm at in terms of jamming everything into about 3 minutes. There's a lot to watch. There's a lot to take away, a lot to overreact from, which is the best part of blue-white weekend, and a lot of good weather and tailgating coming your way.
We talk about the receivers almost every show. And I think James Franklin's messaging has been consistent. Do you think part of it is the pseudopsychology of like not singling anybody out to try and push the group higher? Or is it really just as plain as it is? Like we don't really we're not comfortable. I shouldn't say don't like. We aren't comfortable yet finding a third guy and we want somebody to separate. Or is it kind of like we're not going to name a name because we want everyone to keep pushing? Do you think that there's some of that in there as well?
Well, the man has a psychology degree from the East Stroudsburg University. So like clearly he's a master of this. He would tell you the same. I think it's a little bit of both. I think that the tiers are so distinct here that you've got two guys that you think you can count on. And then maybe you have one guy pop up with a great day in practice and then he takes a step back. I think that's kind of what we're seeing right now is guys that make plays and then all of a sudden have lapses. And that's kind of what you're going to have with a younger group, with Saunders, with Clifford, Evans. You could probably throw Malik McLean in that group as well, because that's kind of how it works for a young player is, it's learning to be consistent. It's learning how to get the most out of them. Marcus Higgins has been barking up a storm at them about ball security and just the little things that turn you into a complete receiver. So I think that it's a little bit of both. You have some very up and down performances from that group this spring. You've had some guys out that have been banged up. So it's like the lack of consistency is what every coach is going to come back to, and that's offense, defense, and special teams. I mean, we were talking with Stacey Collins last week about special teams, and that was the word that came up more than anything was consistency. So you're a young player learning to get through that. There's talent there. Like, I don't think it's a situation where they just have guys that aren't as good as they thought they were, but it's turning that into consistency, and that's a hard thing to do for some guys.
While we got you, Fitz, I got two more questions for you coming up in just a little bit, but I do want to come to Nate. Nate, you were watching the defense, and going back to what Fitz said about how far ahead the defense is over the offense. In that context, what are you looking for from the quarterbacks on Saturday? What are you trying to learn from that environment on Saturday?
Specifically from the quarterbacks?
Yeah, because I think that's what everyone wants to see is Drew Aller throw the football. So aside from it looking really pretty, like what sort of things are you kind of keeping an eye out for with that position? Because we didn't talk at all about it yesterday with James Franklin. There's still a de facto quarterback competition going on, technically.
Yep.
Like, as much as we wink, wink, nod, nod, they're very consistent about that. So what are you looking for from the quarterbacks on Saturday?
Turnovers. Like, I mean, honestly, they might seem, not to be that indicative, right? Because you can get your way through, throw your way through a blue-white game and not throw an interception, and maybe that's not reflective of how you've played all spring. But I just think that in that condition, it's such a huge thing. Like, in that environment, it's such a huge thing to see how these guys fare, being able to keep the ball, right? I mean, because I don't know that it's fair to judge how in sync the quarterbacks are with the receivers. Like, I don't know that they're there yet. And let me rephrase, they're not there. Right. They're not here. Right. Like, I anticipate that the defense is much better than the offense as a whole, and will show that. But the thing that I think is important specifically for the quarterbacks is don't fumble the ball and don't throw interceptions. If they can avoid that, I don't really, if they complete 50% of their passes, I don't think that's the biggest deal in the world. But if they throw 4 interceptions each, like, uh-oh.
Yeah, Fitz, same question to you. That's what I want to know is, like, what are you looking for from the quarterbacks? What are you keeping an eye out for?
Yeah, I think Nate's right with checked expectations. You're going to have overthrowers. You're going to have guys not on the same page. I think it's decision making. It's putting the ball in the right area generally, and that's sometimes on the receiver, sometimes on the quarterback. You're going to have an incompletion that's thrown to the wrong shoulder or something like that. But is it the right read? Is it the right pass? I think that's the thing to take away from it, and that's something that we will wring our hands about on live watch and then go back and look at it again and get a better sense of where these guys are making decisions. And I think that's the biggest thing. We've talked to Mike Yurcich. Decisions is right up at the top. Like, your ability to make quick decisions, your ability to make the right decisions, just trumps everything else. So I think that's one thing. The other thing here is watching Bo Prabula. He's going to be limited this weekend in terms of what he can do in his game, because you're not hitting quarterbacks in a controlled scrimmage. So he's a little bit more of a runner. You would use him more in a little bit in a zone read situation. So I think he's kind of like held back. The reins are kind of on him this weekend. So I don't know that you get the complete Bo Prabula experience. You're going to get to see a little bit more. I think they're going to try and throw it down the field, get some people excited with Drew. So I'm excited to see how that goes. And again, secondary is very good. And I don't, that's first and second team. So no matter which group you're going against, you're going to get tested. And like I said, this stuff is going to pay off. I think they'll be fine in the end. Drew took a big step last summer and in preseason camp, and I think that he can do that again. But I agree with Nate. I just don't think that they're there. This offense had a longer list of things that it needed to accomplish than the defense. So, which means the defense can get focused on the next thing. The defense can get focused on what they need to sharpen as opposed to what they need to learn and put into action. So, excited to see it going in with measured expectations. There's talent there. Like I said, keep your guys healthy, keep Olu off the field, keep your running backs. We're going to see a lot of Holsworth and Tank Smith and Emil Davis, those running backs this weekend, which I'm excited to see them get their shot. Absolutely. But be smart about things and go from there.
I agree. And I'm just looking to see more passes from Drew Aller. Just more information, more of my own assessment of his skills. Because I know that you guys do a great job of getting the information about how these guys are doing in practice when we don't see them. But just from a throw-to-throw basis, learning more information because of the two, Fitz, I think you make a great point about what Bo Prabula does. I feel like that is more predictable. I understand that a little bit more. With Aller, his game is based on the more complex. This is why, in one way, he was behind Bo last spring, is because his game is more predicated on those downfield throws, making those good decisions, understanding, and then delivering. So I'm excited to learn more about Drew Aller just in every phase of, all of those things. Last question I got for you, Fitz, before we get you out of here, is you mentioned recruiting, and we're going to have all the information that, we're going to talk about in depth on Friday on our recruiting preview of the weekend. But weather and, I think a good time of year to be doing this. So, what is the impact of Blue White Weekend on recruiting in a general sense?
It's one of the trinity there. You get Blue White Weekend, Lash Bash, and Whiteout. Those are the three that you would, essentially want to have most of your guys. And if you go back and you look at the data for past classes, that a lot of guys end up at the Blue White game, whether that's already is committed, like a committed 2024 right now, or like a 2026 guy. So that's where you think about this is you can put a lasting impression on somebody with an atmosphere like this. There aren't too many atmospheres like Penn State's in terms of spring games because of the general exhibition nature of things. Sometimes weather plays into it. Florida's having their spring game tomorrow night, Thursday night. Doesn't make any sense to me, but that's kind of, schools approach this differently. Penn State has this as like the marquee event of the spring. And it's one of those ones where you want to get your guys together, part family reunion in terms of the commitments, part recruiting job in terms of getting the next guys in the boat. And they're on a roll right now. So it's good to see that list growing. I know Ryan and I have put up a bunch of names on Blue White Illustrated. So check that out. But yeah, it is a marquee weekend for a reason. There's gonna be a lot of guys here, as there is every year, and it continues to grow. And, there's some really, really good spring games around the country. So you're kind of splitting and sharing some groups of visitors with other schools. But at the same time, it's still always a strong visitor list for Penn State. And they've made they've made an effort to make it work.
Look at that. Fitz, for once, we're early on the live show. I got you out 2 minutes early, so thank you for your time today. I know you got places to be, so I appreciate it.
Thank you guys for joining us. Remember, subscribe, do all the things that he's going to tell you to do, and enjoy Nate Bauer the rest of the time. I mean, you get a bigger screen for him if you're watching on YouTube. So yeah, more likes are on the way when I leave and Nate's coming through. So enjoy, everyone. Hope to see you at the tailgate on Saturday. Stuff will be posted on the site in terms of where they're going to set up. I think they're going to have a better idea, but my dad made sure that I got a plug in for put a plug in on the podcast. So hopefully we see you out there on Saturday.
I love Blue White because it's all the fun of the regular season without the pressure, without the intensity of it, so we can, kick back a little bit. At least for me, I tend to get really wound up on game day. Mike is right. This video needs way more likes. We got a bunch of people watching and only a handful of likes, so please do that. Fitz, thanks again. This is a great time to tell you about our sponsor of the show, and that is Rogue Shop. Rogue Shop is the premier sponsor of the BWI Live Wednesday show. They are, if you don't know at this point, they are a craft cannabis farmers specialized in small batch sustainable plant medicine, and they're from Wisconsin, small indoor grow facility in Big Ten country, and they focus on the health benefits of CBD and THC to help you live a better life. Sleep, anxiety, pain is a huge one for Richard, who is a retired veteran and is really focused on giving people a better form of life, a better existence through some of the things that go through you can encounter in your life. If you've got any of those issues, another one is I talk a lot about inflammation. Inflammation is one of the silent killers in humans because it is the basis of which a lot of really bad problems in your health develop from. It's just inflammation in your body. CBD has been scientifically proven to reduce inflammation throughout the body. They've got a lot of different ways you can take this stuff, by the way. You don't have to take just the gummies. They've got some lollipops. They've got some more direct ways you can do CBD as well. So check that out, rogueshop.com. And once again, I buried the lead. Nate would be disappointed in my auditory writing skills here because it's 10% off when you use promo code BWI. Rogueshop.com. Don't forget to use discount code BWI for 10% off. And if you go to rogueshop.com, you get that information. Let them know you're coming from the live show and let them know T. Frank sent you so that you get that discount and you help us out. Nate, let's get into some of the other stuff that we saw yesterday. We got a bit of a blue-white preview. We're going to get back to that at the end because we got a couple questions about blue-white game in the BWI mailbag. So if you're here in the chat, if you're watching the show, throw your question in now, and we'll get to it at the end. And if you're watching throughout the show, you got a question, we'll get to some of those throughout if they are, on topic of what we're discussing, or if you just got a question, throw it in at the end for the mailbag show so that we have, stuffed full mailbag. We can answer your questions at the end. But what were your observations from yesterday? We talked about the kind of big picture of spring practice coming to a close, blue-white game. But this week is also this week. It's kind of its own time capsule. So your observations from the defense, anything stick out to you, any tidbits that you want to share from your article over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, which you should go check out right now or after the show if you're watching. Yeah.
I guess. Look, I'm always going to give you the same answer here, which is,
I forbid you from saying nothing.
Yeah, I know. I thought that it was interesting to not see Hakeem Beamon in the top two teams on defense, right? Curious to see what's going on there. Right? I mean, defensive tackle is just such a big spot, obviously, as a storyline for this team and this program this offseason that he practiced, right? I mean, I saw him go through all the normal drills and those lines. So to not see him with those first two teams was probably the most significant thing for me coming out of that practice yesterday. But look, you're lacking Tyler Elston. So what does that do to the Mike linebacker situation? That Tony Rojas and Tamir Robinson are involved, right? The numbers, I think, for linebacker, just as Fitz said earlier, I haven't been with the defense for earlier practices. He has, but seeing that firsthand to just not see the numbers, I guess, for linebackers is kind of interesting to me, even if they have guys there with or without, right? I mean, Abdul Carter's still Abdul Carter. Curtis Jacobs is still Curtis Jacobs. They're still impressive guys. It's just a matter of how depth shakes out and how different things maybe rearrange once you have a full allotment of all of your players.
The percentage, having spent time with both sides, the percentage of scholarship guys when you're watching the drill versus the run-on guys is pronounced. Like, oh, wow, there's almost an even split at times between guys that are scholarship players and the guys that are run-ons, and nothing disrespectful about those guys, but when you're projecting the depth chart in the two deep, you might get a little concerned. But that I think is a great point about the defense. With James Franklin talked about where they are this spring and how things may have met his expectations or not met his expectations, and he listed off special teams, which I think we'll get to in a little bit. But he did say, the main competitions are still the main competitions. Yeah. Receiver and defensive tackle, those are not decided. Did you ever expect defensive tackle to be decided this spring, given the situation?
No. I wouldn't say decided. I guess there could have been an assertion, right? Like somebody could have stepped to the forefront. I don't know that being realistic or honest that anyone expected Zane Durant to be the player that he was last spring to have made kind of that move. But then even then, once you got to the season, that storyline, and I think he was dealing with some injury at various points through the season, but he wasn't, I'm not saying that he didn't live up to the expectations that eventually were set for him because he was such a buzzworthy player last spring. Yeah. But it's just a matter of being realistic, right? Like being realistic about who these players are and what they do. And for defensive tackle, without Keziah Izzard, right? Like we didn't get to see him. He hasn't been practicing this spring. So without him, without that piece of the puzzle, it's just really hard to get a gauge of who and where these guys are. But I do think it's somewhat relevant that, you know, it's not like one of the major thrusts this spring was, oh, Jordan Vandenberg has like the lights come on, right? That the light is just flipped on for him, and he's a different player this spring than he was the year before. Sometimes that happens, but also sometimes it doesn't, right? Sometimes these guys are who they are, and there's a little bit of a ceiling there. So, it's just going to be interesting to watch how they treat that position this offseason, and importantly, whether or not there's somebody out there. If there's a Chop Robinson out there, they're gonna go get him. They're gonna do everything that they can to make that happen.
There are people who are replying directly to our YouTube channel, trying to get to James Franklin in any way possible. Like they're addressing James on our channel in the comments. So the defensive tackle in the portal is a screaming need for everyone who watches Penn State football and who's heard James Franklin talk about it. And he made that comment yesterday. He the opening salvo, where last year he was talking about at the beginning of spring. He hasn't been as upfront about like recruiting through the media as he was last year at defensive end, but it is something he talked about this year of, okay, it seems like he kind of feels how you do, that there hasn't been the light come on for anybody they were hoping. So now it's about addition. It's not about the depth bubbling to the surface. And going back to Zane Durant quickly, I think that's a really interesting conversation, because you mentioned the buzz for him last spring, but I think the context of what he did was important, where he was a part of their third down package by the end of the season as a pass rusher. You know, he's not going to be an every down player as a true freshman at defensive tackle. At least that was not how it played out. And whether or not that was the anticipation of the coaching staff going in and didn't quite meet that, or if that was the over anticipation of everybody else, I think that was part of the conversation. My concern would be this year if he isn't, and he doesn't take a significant step forward to be kind of a standout player. Is that not the progression you would want from a guy who made that step so early? And then if he kind of plateaus this year, is that an issue for that group, on top of the fact that they don't have the numbers and the standouts and everything we just talked about?
Yeah, I don't think that's really a question. I think that I think that James talked about him yesterday, that he has had a good spring. He has been good this spring. So no, I don't think there's any concern there. It's just a matter of, there's varying degrees of this conversation, right? Is defensive tackle a weakness? I wouldn't say so. I don't think that's where they're at. Are there vulnerabilities in how they are currently positioned in that group in terms of having a variety of size, having different players who can fulfill different roles? Yeah, I think so. I think that's a fair critique, and that's a fair weakness of that group going into the summer. But it doesn't change Zane Durant being a good, reliable option who is still, he's kind of young to this, right? Like this is new to him. And so it's just a matter of, can he be like an all-conference player? Maybe, but is that necessarily a fair expectation? I'm not sure. But I do think that he is. I haven't heard anything. I haven't been made aware of anything to suggest that he's not on the same path, that he's still that he's not on the same trajectory of getting better that you would hope for from a sophomore player.
Some of the things I saw last night myself, I was with the offense, checking out some of those guys. And by the way, you can check out, we'll have some previews of the Blue-White game coming up this week here on Blue-White Illustrated on YouTube, of the offense and the defense. What I was interested in yesterday was looking at the offensive line, getting kind of an update or refresher right before the Blue-White game about what was going on. A lot of position versatility practice yesterday. So you had some guys that are normally guards playing with the tackles, some tackles that are normally guards vice versa, and then some guys playing center and getting some reps at guard. So I asked James Franklin about this yesterday in the post-practice press conference, and what's the value overall for the team in getting guys that, is somebody gonna show you that they can play tackle to the level of maybe we'll switch out our tackle rotation, or maybe somebody competes for a job. And what he talked about, I think, to start, was pretty interesting about how it's not just about who can do it and who can take on that responsibility, position flexibility, but who can't. Like, who is absolutely at one position and you're not going to move around, and who can play between positions. And I think that does affect, in a lot of ways, starting rotation, all those things. Because if you know a guy can play two positions, you might not emphasize him at a key position like tackle, right? Because you can get him in a guard a little bit, and you can you have that kind of versatility in your back pocket. So somebody who is kind of locked into a position might see more reps there because that's the only place they're going to get those reps. And then generally, like, it didn't sound like they are to the point where they have their 9 or 10 deep. It was very specific. It seemed pretty clear that, like, they're hovering around 7 to 8 guys that they like, and there's a clear drop-off after that. So kind of reading between the lines there of, if you have 9 or 10, that's great, but it didn't sound like, and from what I observed, they're not planning like that right now. So that's, again, what we saw from yesterday. You have thoughts?
Yeah, well, just they don't have a 1-to-1 backup situation right now. They're like, right.
Yeah.
The left tackle isn't backed up by necessarily the immediate, like, someone who is always practicing at left tackle. Right. And I mean, let's be honest. Let's talk about that position flexibility and finding out who's not able to rotate, right, or change, or have that position flexibility. And I think in a big way, it's been Drew Shelton this spring. James Franklin talked about it a couple of weeks ago. That move to the right side just didn't work. I'm not saying that it's impossible or that he wouldn't fill in a pinch. I think that he would. I just think it's a question of, if Caden Wallace gets hurt at right tackle, is Drew Shelton a long-term solution at right tackle? Probably not. They would probably have to shift things around there to be able to get the guy in that they would want. And that could include moving JB Nelson, right? It could include some of that position flexibility that you're seeing from other players there on the offensive line. But in a 1-to-1 situation, could Drew Shelton be the immediate backup left tackle? Yeah, for sure. Like, if Shanu wasn't available, then that would be a different situation. So it's just,
I think he's going to have to be either way.
Exactly.
He's going to have to be no matter what. That's where you have that confidence from last year was, he did it last year, so left is taken care of. It's now, can we shore up the right side? We got a comment here from Steven in the chat. He says, only a few teams, going back to our defensive tackle conversation, only a few teams on the schedule can take advantage of the defensive tackle through the run game. I think that's a fair point too. The team I'm really interested in early in the season is Illinois. Obviously Illinois. But here's the other part, Nate, is like, Illinois under Brett Bielema has been very good. In the sense of, they've been a team you've got to be afraid of in specific instances. Their defense last year was excellent. They're also losing a couple top 64 players. Does Illinois, have they had the time with Bielema to create replaceable depth? And is that going to be a situation? I think in the run game, that is true. But overall, Illinois as a team, I'm still interested to see kind of how it's not just about having 1 or 2 good years. It's, can you sustain it? And, you've got the regulars on the schedule, but then that game early in the season, one area where Penn State's defensive tackle depth could be tested, not to bring up a whole lot of bad thoughts and bad vibes from a couple years ago. Lost my train of thought here. I apologize. Popping over
West Virginia, T. Frank.
Yes, exactly. I'm sorry that I looked ahead on the schedule. I'm not bound by that, by the way.
That's true. No, but look, just one last thing about the defensive tackle thing. Acknowledging that there's only a few teams on the schedule that can really exploit it is kind of the point, I think, at where we're at, right? When you evaluate this program and you evaluate what its opportunities are this season, it's changed, right? The storyline isn't about a bounce back year. It's not about, hey, kind of getting out of the funk of 2020 and 2021. It's, can they get to the playoff?
Yeah.
Right. Like, and maybe that's unfair. I don't know if that's unfair or not. I am, as you know, like the most hesitant person in the world to try to cite that as being the only standard of success. Yeah. I think that's a garbage storyline and product of what college football is today. But also, I'm realistic enough to know that internally, that's what they want. That's where they're trying to get. And so if there are a couple of teams on the schedule that can exploit your defensive tackle issues, and they are Ohio State and Michigan and maybe Illinois, and you lose those games, ultimately that's a disappointing season.
Ohio State didn't even do that last year. Like they had one run that went for a touchdown that was a big play, but that was a bust by a linebacker. You know, now the offensive lineman got to the second level without any sort of pushback, but that was kind of the scheme and the system, how those things met up there in that one instance is the linebacker didn't get to his gap, and then Travion Henderson is a lot fast, is very much super fast. So David asked a question here, and I think it's a good question, but it's also maybe a little bit missing the point, but it is something I want to bring up here, talking about defensive tackles. How much weight can Zane Durant add over the summer to be able to play with elite size? Because that's obviously the goal. I don't think he'll get much bigger, like in terms of weight, maybe. So he's 276, I think, right now on the official roster. I could see maybe he gets to 280, but that would be, to me, that's the topping out point for his body. Is that I would think he gets to 280, 281, and that's where you want him to be as a guy who is 6 feet tall, that doesn't have a massively long frame. That's the other thing is, like, with all the comparisons to the other undersized defensive tackles, Zane Durant does not have the reach. He doesn't have the 34-inch reach with the absurdly long arms for his frame. He's kind of built the way that, you would be normally built. So this isn't a guy that's going to be 285, 290 at 6'1". Do you think that that's even a part of the conversation with Zane specifically, getting bigger over the summer, or is it other guys you're interested in?
I have no idea. I mean, the only thing that's coming to my mind is I think that Franklin said earlier this spring, or maybe it was this winter, that Durant had been putting on about a pound a week. Mm-hmm. I believe that was the statement, and that it was all good weight. So what does that give us? 12 weeks until the start of the season, maybe 15 weeks. But you would think that there would be a plateau point, and then also realistically, he's going to lose weight during the season. Yep. So, right, how does that fall out? I don't know, but yeah, I would. I'll go 285. Right. I'm not sure. I always
$1, Bob.
I always love getting into the weeds over pounds. Right.
This is very much a T. Frank conversation. I appreciate you participating. Honestly,
I'm here for it. I want to hear what you have to say for it.
I don't know how productive this is or how valuable this is to the conversation, but I want us to be a fair and balanced show. Vern makes his point here in the chat, which is roundly not liked so far. James Franklin, only person holding back Penn State. So there you go, Vern. You got your thoughts on camera. If you want to have a mailbag discussion about maybe some of those points, bring them up in the BWI Mailbag. Form of a question is preferable, and that's coming up at the end of the show. Guys you talked to after practice. I'm going to start with Trey Wallace, because I have been like a bloodhound on this idea of what is Marcus Hagen bringing to the Nittany Lions at the receiver position as the coach. And every single week I see them doing another drill that is about breaking tackles, high pointing the ball, playing through contact, playing in small spaces, and playing big boy football as receivers, breaking tackles, getting upfield. So I asked Trey Wallace, is that fair? And he's like, yeah, that is something that, he basically said, yeah, that's a lot of stuff we've been practicing. And one of the things he talked about, which I think is obvious for him to latch onto, is how to high point the ball. He talked about catching the ball, making sure you're getting it on the way up instead of on the way down or falling back. And just small things like that, I think, can be big things for Penn State in terms of, we talked about their ability to make plays in contested catch situations last year and their ability to be open when they're not open. That was a struggle. And obviously Sean Clifford not throwing the football into tight coverage is a part of that story, but that's also a learned habit too. So with Drew Aller and with this receiving game, where are the strides going to be made? And I'm not surprised, given what we've heard of Trey Wallace so far this spring, that he's latched onto some of these things from Marcus Hagans. And the light, I think, for a player, if you want to know, light has come on. Just watching him run routes, his routes have been much better this year. Much more precise, much more explosive out of his transitions, and seems to get the position a little bit better. So for me, that was what I latched on to, some of the guys I talked to. You talked to Jaywan Sider. What interesting things did he have to say?
He said a few interesting things, and I don't want to spoil my opportunity to use them for some stories, but I'm going to.
Just give me some tidbits. Nate, just give me some tidbits. Give me some leading conversations that you can go to bluewhiteillustrated.com later and hear what Nate has to say if you want to sign up, which you can do that now, $29.99 through the end of the summer to get access to premium content. So now to set you up, throw the meatball down the plate, hit a home run for me.
Well, just I would say that the longer that Jaywan is at Penn State, the more comfortable he is in just saying what he feels. And I wouldn't necessarily say that he hadn't done that previously, but last night it was on full display. And the first thing that he said, and it was just kind of an aside, but he was asked about competition and how Nick Singleton and Katron Allen have that culture in the room and how it spurs each other on. And more or less, Jaywan said something to the effect of, those two guys cleared out the room, right? Like, all of the players that had been there previously are gone because of how good they are and how competitive they are. And so now it's a matter of reestablishing that with other players who can compete with them, right? Like, other players who aren't afraid of the competition and want to continue to grind through it. So I thought that was interesting. The way that he said it was very funny. I guess maybe he had to be there, but it was just like, man, those two cleaned out the room.
Diplomacy is always the nicest way to say stuff, but that's saying that, like, the players who left did not want to compete, and that is, I think, a shot at those guys in a certain way. And maybe it's just being frank and honest, which he probably had the conversation with those guys when they were on their way out the door, but. Like you said, being comfortable to say it out loud is a different thing. What else did he say?
He was also asked about the West Virginia game. Obviously, he has a history with West Virginia, and more or less, not more or less, he said that he wanted to kick their rear ends. And I'm being the polite one here. So, it was payback. I don't know where payback would come from, but I guess he is very, very motivated for Penn State to win its opening game of the season and do so convincingly. It was absolutely April 11 bulletin board material for West Virginia and Penn State going into that game.
There were a couple other things he said in passing that I overheard while I was kind of wrapping up what I was doing, talking about what I thought was really interesting we know we're going to get 8 in the box with Nick and Katron next year. So it's going to be about making the unblocked defender miss. And he's talked about this before. James Franklin has talked about this before, but like laying it on the line of we're going to do it this year. It is going to be, you can't play with a single high safety because we're going to run away from that guy after we break a tackle. And kind of just laying it on the line. Yeah, laying not just it. I wouldn't say just expectations, but also demanding it of those guys. That he knows they're capable of doing it, and it's not going to be like, well, X, Y, or Z, it didn't happen. You've got to make that guy miss, and you've got to get a touchdown.
It's a little bit of the Sean Clifford storyline of they are going to be, in his mind, and I think what they've seen to a certain extent is pairing the physical ability now with recognition, right? Which is something that they would not have had last season as true freshmen. They just hadn't had enough time to know what defenses were doing all the time. That now they know it. And, is it the same expectation that you're going to have for those guys as seniors or juniors in their cases before they are off to the NFL? No, time helps all of those things. That's what development is. But it's just a radically different place to be in after having a season in the books. So they've had a season in the books. This is their second spring that they've had in the books. And Jaywan and Mike Yursich and all those guys have been able to impart to those particular players, Nick and Katron, where's the free man? Where's the hitter coming from? Right. And it's going to be different all the time. And that's exactly what defenses are going to try to do, is confuse them. But these guys are capable of recognizing that, being able to be prepared for. It's so funny to me because I always think of it in these terms, like all of this preparation, all of this work is for something that happens like this, right? Like it is so fast and it has to become instinctive for them. But that's what all of this is about. That's what that's what 9 months of off season are about for those two guys, is to put themselves in a position where when it happens, they see it before it happens and make the play, because they're that talented physically that they're able to do that.
I love a good conversation. The only downside is I stopped paying attention to the clock. And we spent a good amount of time on practice yesterday.
Here
and
we
what
are.
we saw yesterday. We do have to get to our final two segments, and I'm going to make sure we get it in on time. So let's get to what James Franklin had to say, because this is going to be a big, meaty conversation for Nate between the lines.
They have both gotten reps with runs.
I'm going to start with his second comment from yesterday. We're talking all about NIL and facilities during Between the Lines. We're going to start with his second comment when the follow-up to the first one about where are you with NIL. And you should go check out, I condensed these as much as I could. There's a lot of stuff we're not going to get to in what he said, because it was like 5 minutes worth of him talking about this. But here is the first quote that we'll get to.
Yeah, we still got a ton of work to do. We started out the first couple years where we said we were going to teach student athletes how to be entrepreneurs. That was our NIL model. So we were 2 years behind everybody else. I think over the last year we've made significant progress. But if you give somebody a 2-year start in basically a 3-year model, I think it's pretty obvious. But what I've been doing is, instead of talking to you guys about it, we've been working to try to solve it, as much as we possibly can, by going out and educating the fan base and the donors about what we're truly competing against.
Nate, I feel like I could write a 1,500-word essay about him changing his pronoun from I to we when talking about trying to fix the problem. Yeah. Because that's really... he said a lot of stuff in there that we need to get to. But to me, the underlying current this whole time for the last 10 years has been, I have to try and fix it. I have to get... And now there's a we. There is a group of people working with him to take some of that off his plate so he can be the football coach again. Is that... Am I reading into that? But that's kind of what I've heard from you. Is that fair Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. For the most part, it's hard. I think that Pat Kraft still has some barriers, some political behind the scenes things that have to be navigated, right? It's just a reality of the situation that he walked into. But I took the we comment more to be along the lines of, hey, it is everyone at Penn State, right? So whether that's James Franklin himself or Dan Kabbalah, the person the director kind of Penn State's in-house NIL efforts for football, Pat Kraft and his deputy athletic directors, like you name it. It is about getting people to understand what it looks like. The thing that is so interesting to me is I don't like James Franklin is holding his nose while saying some of this stuff, right? Like, I don't think he loves the notion of NIL and what it represents. I mean, he's as old school as it gets in terms of the value that existed for him as a college football player, riding the bus 5 hours each way for a game, eating a Snickers bar in the bus, right? Like on the bus. That was his experience. And it has been so impactful on his life that he went through that. He values all of those things. But also, the bigger point of all of this is that's cool. That is so great for him in his life. That is not what exists today. It's not. It is not the model that is out there. And the way that Penn State positioned itself, as he said at the start, of trying to educate student athletes into becoming entrepreneurs was wildly different from the rest of the landscape.
I feel a little sheepish because when that came out, I remember thinking, good, like that should be a part of the model of education about not just handing kids a bunch of money, and I apologize for using the word kids, young men a bunch of money, and then just have fun, good luck with it, like. But there was the handing the kids a bunch of money part that he's pointing out, like, no, we meant just education. Right. That's all we're going to be doing. And, at the beginning, I was like, good, this is the way it should be. But like, no, for competition, that was the wrong approach. So, how do you, and I think the way the question was phrased was, how do you, and can you dig out of a hole from facilities and NIL to get back to a competitive footing? And Penn State has been competitive despite all this, right? Like, we're talking about all these things, but they've still been competitive in almost every game where there hasn't been COVID or 2021 outside of that.
Competitive on the field, but it's a question of when does that catch up to you? Well, right? If you don't have, and I talked about this all the time, but there is a little bit of a home team discount. Right. You can get away with some stuff. You can not necessarily be at the upper end of NIL efforts and get away with it. It's just a question of how many areas are you trying to get away with versus how many areas are you trying to be the best at? Yep. And the reality for Penn State is NIL is something that they've tried to get away with. And I'm not in any way saying that is like an indictment that they haven't tried at all. It's simply a matter of the course that was chosen from the very first steps of this was counter to everything else that was happening nationally. Everybody else nationally, and I'm not saying everyone else, but a good majority nationally saw this as an opportunity to harness the power of their fan bases, their donors, and use it as a competitive edge. That's what people just fail to wrap their heads around how everything in college football is about that. The NCAA used to have rules preventing media guides from having all color pages because certain programs would go 500-page media guides, all color pages. They were so expensive that the rest of the model couldn't keep up, right? That was a media guide. It's so stupid, but that's what the NCAA was able to prohibit. Yeah. Like, that's just such a small representative sample size of what is happening nationally in NIL. It is, how can we possibly use our resources to our advantage to create a model that attracts players who are good at winning and playing football games to come to our program? If you want to educate them on top of that, that's great. Like that's totally fine. But that is not what the thrust was for everyone else. And Penn State is paying for it now by trying to catch up to that and by trying to reframe the conversation into, hey, everyone, this isn't bad. This is not a bad thing. This is not something to be afraid of. You are already donating financially to the football program at Penn State. We just need you to switch directions in where that money is going.
So I think to kind of sum everything up, what you just said, and kind of what just flat out what James Franklin has said before, he put it in pretty blunt terms when asked about facilities, which also led into the NIL conversation.
The reality is, if you choose and want to compete at the very highest level, you guys have heard me say this before, you can't pick and choose what you're going to compete in. I think the other thing is, you guys remember, this discussion is very similar to a discussion we had 10 years ago when I was talking about facilities and people were looking at me like I was crazy. And the reality is, the people that were aggressive on the front end with facilities, then obviously they're able to shift their focus to the new challenge. So the reality is, as you guys have heard me before, whether it's facility, whether it's staff size, whether it's alignment, whether it's NIL, whether it's all these things, if you truly want to compete at the highest level, then you can't say we're going to be competitive in these three areas and not in this one.
When he's talking about a decade ago, talking about infrastructure, it reminded me of have you seen the Internet Explorer meme of the one where they're trying to chant and protest, and all the web browsers are saying, what do we want? Faster internet. When do we want it? Now. And Internet Explorer goes, infrastructure, at the very 3 seconds late, because it's always way behind. Having the conversation about infrastructure right now is a decade late in this conversation, and he's saying, to nutshell, you can't choose anymore. You have to be all in on all of it if you want to be Penn State. If you want to be the national program that you think you are, that competes nationally, it's got to be all in, and it's not one or the other. Any other interesting things, any other interesting tidbits from yesterday that you want to talk about without sharing maybe something you're going to write later this week or preview something?
I always find it intriguing how the conversation is framed around an arms race as though the winners of arms races aren't ultimately the winners. Right?
What do you mean?
Well,
I don't know if I know what you mean there.
It's an arms race is framed as this bad thing, right? You're just piling on to pile on, and that's the reason why you're doing it, is because you're in an arms race. It's counterproductive. You should be diverting resources to other things. But and again, I mean, I'm not taking this to war, but
right.
The winner of the arms race is the one who gets to decide what happens, right?
Right.
They are the person, they are the thing that is in the dominant position. And so you might frame it as an arms race. That's a terrible thing, but college football is an arms race. The winners are winning the arms race. They're the ones who are pouring the resources. Georgia did it. Go back and look at how these programs built themselves. Look at what Nick Saban did at Alabama. Look at Texas. Well, Texas is a terrible example because they are spending and they aren't getting a return on it because they have no longevity. But that's a different conversation. The point is, if you look at the teams, if you look at the programs that are consistently there, not one-off, one-season stories, they all are dumping money, resources, time, energy, alignment into the product. And for Penn State to feel as though it doesn't have to do that, or not only that it doesn't have to do that, but that it shouldn't do that, well, then you can't be surprised by the results. Right? Because in a lot of ways, what Penn State has done thus far under James Franklin for the past 10 years is outperform where it is infrastructurally and resource wise.
So that'll be the last word on that, because we got to get to the people's questions. are spanning the globe, spanning the internet for questions today. We've got some from the BWI message board, which, by the way, the best way to secure a spot on the mailbag is to sign up BlueWhiteIllustrated.com and go to the Lions Den message forum the day of the show and submit your question on the mailbag submission thread. You can also do so in the chat, but, we've got about 5 minutes before we hit an hour. We might go a little bit longer than that. We also have some from our YouTube page, where we have a question that came from our YouTube page as well that I want to get to. So let's start with one of our message board questions because they are, I think, BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, Blue-White game specific. So Nittany asks, who will the BWI staff be watching during the Blue-White game and why? Fitz said he's watching the quarterbacks. Nate, who are you watching?
Riley Thompson, Alex Paqueta, Gabe Nwosu, Alex Felkins, and Sander Sahedek.
Well, you got to this question as well. Forget defensive tackle and third wide receiver. Should we be most concerned about place kicker next season? Nate, thoughts?
No, not most concerned, but equally. Yeah.
Equally? Okay. I think that it's a really great point, and I will leave it to you guys to chronicle that because my observational and analytical skills as a film analyst do not extend to the place kicking. Because I can't tell you if he's doing it right or wrong. I just know if he misses, which literally everyone can see if he misses. But with the guys I'm watching doing the things I just described, quarterback is number one for me as well. I want to learn way more about Drew Aller from my own eyes, my own observations, because I'm that way about everything when it comes to football. And then secondarily, I'm interested in the linebackers. I'm interested in how they're going to and what they'll show us about what they're going to be doing with linebackers, knowing that they're a little thin at Mike linebacker, so there might be some things that don't totally translate, but they might. We might see Abdul Carter play a lot of Mike linebacker, and that leads us into our next question here, which is from Penn State 2012. With the buzz regarding Tony Rojas, how do you see him fitting into the defense this fall? That is a big piece of this puzzle. So, Nate, how do you break down linebackers in your mind when you're talking about this group, given what we talked about earlier with kind of the depth that you're concerned with? Is this as much about him being good or as much as they're going to need him next year?
Pass. I'm giving this to you, Juan. Like, you're better at knowing where the pieces fit, but I would just say that will he be a factor? Yeah, I think he will be a factor based on a combination of his talent and the numbers.
Yeah, and he should be a comfortable Sam linebacker in this defense because it's not a full-time position, given that it comes off the field on third down. And it is the natural progression of where they start most linebackers is at that Sam position, and then they transition as they get older and more mature over to the will. That's kind of how it's been for the long run. There's been a couple blips where like Cam Brown played Sam as a senior, just kind of the way they were working things together. But I think this is how they want it to go. His progression this offseason has been more than I expected. And it's not like Abdul Carter, because Abdul Carter, the light you saw come on his senior season in high school, and you saw some of those immediately translatable mental skills with the physical, and you expected him to do something, and then he took it into overdrive once he got to Penn State. Rojas was starting from a very different position of having no experience, essentially, at linebacker. And for him to make up the ground physically and mentally, the mental part is where I want to learn more, because watching him drop into drill, doing just coverage drop drills, he looks really good at it. Like, he looks like it's natural to him to turn, to drop, to look for the football. So from the mental side, where is he? And that's going to be something that I'll try to get a couple of clues on when it comes to the blue-white game, because that field linebacker is very coverage heavy. He runs a 4.4. He's perfect for that situation. He is the perfect blend of size and athleticism, but does he get it all yet? And the reports are he's getting a lot of it more than they expected, but that is also not in the context of how much does he need to get for all of it. It's good for what you expected. Is it good for the position? And that's another area where I think we're going to have to learn more about how he fits into the defense next year. Dom DeLuca is still going to be part of that conversation. Curtis Jacobs has something to say at the SAM because you got to keep him on the field with Abdul Carter. This is the rub for next year. So a lot of mix and match, a lot of position versatility, but absolutely at this point, I think he is a factor. You
Good
asked
problem to have too.
Yes.
Right. Like you want that.
Let's go into the chat. I want to make sure that I get some of these in. Here's a good one about the offensive line. Nick Shear says, T. Frank, Nate, what do we need to see from the O-line on Saturday to have the reaction of, yeah, this group is really good, better than last year? Do you want me to go first, or do you want to go first?
You can go first.
Okay. I apologize that I'm reading the question, doing the transitions, and then answering the questions.
Sorry.
No, it's I love this because you're right. This is exactly the stuff I want to know. I'm looking at, like, how are you executing the play? Not necessarily did you beat up on the third string tackle. Like, does it look crisp? Does it look uniform? Does it look like everyone is making the right read? Because even last year, watching a couple of plays where Landon Tangwall came in, I think, at tackle and made a couple of mental mistakes, and that's you don't want that. Like, you just want to have a clean game. So from that perspective, are guys stepping the right way in the blocking scheme? Are they communicating? Are they passing off the defensive tackle and getting to the second level? Are they totally looking the wrong way and whiffing on those assignments? So it's a lot of those details that Phil Trautwein has been drilling in all spring, and you'll see the result of them one way or the other. So tackles for loss might be a place where somebody missed a block. You might not know who, but somebody probably missed a block or lost. And then secondarily, if you get a big run where the running back just goes through the line like a hot knife through butter, that means that everyone got their blocks where they were supposed to. So I'd be looking for tackles for loss and big plays, and then it is an area where I'm going to be going into the film to try and have the breakdown afterwards of, okay, that's all the things that we wanted to see. Let's see.
I think it's hard to get. I think it's hard to get a gauge of really good, right? You can only see really good versus like competition, and that will not exist on Saturday.
I'm trying to. I had a good plan. Okay, here we go. Let's go to this question from David WG. Do you see KJ Winston fitting into that Tig Brown Prowler or Tig Brown role in the Prowler package, or will it be Jalen Reed? Now, this comes from something I wrote for BlueWhiteIllustrated.com earlier this week, talking about how you replace Tig Brown and kind of just getting into how the Prowler package works. I think Jalen Reed will get the first crack at it as the veteran player, older and more mature, but also struggled in coverage last year. So if we're talking about Tig Brown, the pass rusher, I think Jalen Reed, if you want to take advantage of his strengths, he is really good in underneath coverage. I think he has a better feel for those things. That's where he started a couple years ago when he got on the field in third down defense. Now you got to see what he does as a pass rusher. So I'll be interested in that. And then I think KJ Winston plays a certain role as a coverage player that can drop down. And if you're blitzing and replacing, you might bring KJ Winston down onto that first level. I'm interested to see how they use Zakee Wheatley, because I think there's a couple ways you can use him. Center fielder, cleaning up all the errant throws and running to the football and getting the instinctive plays. But also, something Tig Brown did last year that they de-emphasized later on was he was the spy in the defense, where he was reading the quarterback and trying to undercut routes that were thrown under pressure to get interceptions. I think Wheatley would be great at that. I would want to see how that works with this offense. When it comes to this stuff, though, Nate, are you expecting to see much of anything when it comes to the to the third down or some of their packages?
No.
Do you have
NIL, pal?
Do you have any questions? I feel like I've dominated the segment, so I apologize.
I don't. I mean, I'm spent, I think.
All right. Well, then we're done. We're done here. That's the end of the show. Thanks for coming. Thanks for sitting for us and being a part of the conversation today on the BWI Live Show. Make sure you like the video, subscribe, and if you want to catch the full show, you coming in late, you can catch it on replay here on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. That is Nate Bauer. We will be back with more coverage, BlueWhiteIllustrated.com this weekend for Penn State football's blue-white game. Friday, we have our recruiting show here on YouTube as well, so stay tuned for that. We'll talk to you then.